Yes, I'm actually going to show you in just a second. I'm going to
Perfect.
demo it, and I'm going to. Oops, sorry. I'm guessing that the system timed me out, so you guys will have to bear with me as I log into demo in a moment. But yes, I will show that, Melissa. Okay, so as far as outreach, outreach to the certified firms to help encourage registration is ongoing. And we wanted to mention that Secretary of State actually did an Oregon Buys outreach event last week and pushed out invites to all the certified firms. So we continue to reach out to them. We're working with Carrie Baxendall with the COVID group so that we can encourage them to register. When I looked yesterday, we had 827 COVID certified firms currently registered in Oregon Buys. So with that, I do want to show quickly, I'm going to move back over, and like I said, very likely it has timed me out. Let's see. Oh, no, I'm still there. Okay. Can everybody see the Oregon Buy system?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. Okay, so I am in UAT, our test environment right now, so I'm just putting that caveat out there. There's not nearly as much real information here, but I do want to show what the process will look like. There's a couple of different things that folks can do for looking for those COVID firms. So first of all, if you just are on the home page, and before I move, I will show there's that news item I had talked about. But if you're on the home page, you could do just a vendor search. So if I go up to advanced, and I want to do a search of vendors. First of all, I'm going to just point out, because this catches me all the time, it's just something you've got to get used to. This match criteria in the upper right corner is defaults to all, but if I want to see any, I can toggle over to any. So what I'm going to do is toggle over to any and then come down here and click the different certification categories. If I left it set to all, it would look for vendors that had all of these, not just one. So I do that and I click search. So this is showing me that in UAT, in the test environment, we've got 34 vendors that have COVID certifications on them. And then on any of these, I could drill in. I could just click on here and I could go over to their terms and categories to actually see their certifications. So on this one is an MBE. So that is one option. I'm going to just close this and go back to my home. This little icon right here takes you to your home page. And UAT is slower than production, so give it just a moment here as we refresh. Okay, I'm going to go to a bid. This is my recent documents over here on the side. So we've got a draft bid in progress. And if I go to the bidders tab, this is a recommended process. I just wanted to show for folks. If you're on the bidders tab, this is where you're setting up. If I click look up and add vendors, this is where you're setting up the list of the vendors that are going to get an email notification about this bid. And what we recommend doing is scrolling to the bottom and say, find vendors for all commodity codes on the bid. That'll bring back, and again, we're UAT, so there's not very many vendors in here, but that'll bring back any of the vendors that have that commodity listed in their registration. And we would recommend that you would include all of these. So just select. What you can do, there's a warning just in case there's a whole lot. One other option, if you wanted to only look for specific certified firms, you could certainly do that. So instead, you could come in here and you could select for certain certification types. Because this is UAT, I'm not even going to attempt because I doubt there's one that matches the commodity code, but you can kind of filter down and only look for certain certification types. So you have some ability there. You could do that. You could look by commodity if you only wanted to add to those. But again, our recommendation is that you add all of the vendors that match that commodity, because then all of those vendors will get a push notice about it. And that would include any certified firms. Are there any questions on that process? I just want to point out too, since we're on this page, this unrestricted and restricted bid, So again, this unrestricted bid would allow it to still be visible to other vendors, not just the list that you're building to get push notices about it. Okay, I'm going to minimize this and come back to our slide deck here. So I did want to talk about how we reach out then to those vendors that are not yet registered. So we know that not all COVID firms are registered in Oregon Buys yet. And so what we recommend doing, and this goes in line with a policy that I know that Kelly will be talking about after the Oregon Buys presentation here, but is to go out and do a search in the COVID vendor directory. So for folks, if you haven't done that before, I assume most have, but you can go out to their site and do a search in this directory of certified firms. And so you can look for the different certification types, and you can drill down by commodity code. And so what we recommend doing is going in and looking for the firms that match the commodity, and then sending an email to those firms. And we've included an email template here. We're going to actually build this as well so that it's available in that news section on your homepage in Oregon Buys. But send an email notification to those folks. What's great about Oregon Buys that's different from what we had in Orphan is that the public can get to the open bids and they can get to the attachment, so they can look at this and decide if this is something they would want to submit a quote on. So what this template says, for folks that may not be able to see this, greetings, COVID certified supplier. Our agency has posted an opportunity in Oregon Buys that matches your NIGP commodity certification. You may view this opportunity and any attachments on OregonBuys.gov by selecting supplier activities and clicking on open bids. The bid number is, and you'd fill that in. If you'd like to submit a quote in response to this bid, you must first register your firm as a supplier in Oregon Buys. Click the blue register button in the upper right corner of the system to get started. Supplier registration assistance is available at. So that can be sent out via email directly to those firms that are not yet registered. They can go to the Oregon Buys landing page and pull up that bid and take a look at it. We also recommend the bottom bullet here to save a record of that email that you send out, because that shows which vendors you have reached out to. And then you can save that for your procurement file. You could upload it to your Oregon Buys bid and mark it like as a confidential attachment, so that way it's right in there. But that way you're documenting which firms you've included or pushed out a notification to that have not yet registered in the system.
So I have a couple questions for you. For you, Nicole. Sharon Rand, said, for the QA topic, one of the things that isn't in the QA guidance is relating to adding the total contract value to the contracts that were uploaded to Oregon Buys for us. Do we need to try and add the total contract value on these or leave them at 0?
For the Q&A topic.
She means at the end of the meeting for QA, or when we get to QA.
Okay.
Oh,
so
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well then we'll skip that one. And then the question that Julie has that's specific to what you're talking about is, does the BPO allow us to track the award as going to a COVID vendor?
So what I'll say on that, we're working on the COVID reporting now, and Jenny may be able to give a little more information as well. But remember that Oregon Buys contains, I talked about the way that the certifications come through. It contains active certifications. So the certification information is wiped out every day, and then the active certifications are uploaded. And so we're kind of working on the different reports, but when we talk about being able to report on things historically, we'll probably be doing some marrying between spend reports out of Oregon Buys and then some reports from the COVID database that give information about this is when the certification started and this is when it may be expired. That type of information isn't in Oregon Buys.
But we are able to collect. If they have a certification and they were noticed, we will report that. And if they still have that certification when it was awarded, it will collect that.
Right.
But if you go outside and do an email, it can't track any of that.
Right. Okay. can we add a custom
There-
column to track? Potentially, we could add a custom column to track. That would rely on users filling it in. But that might be something that we could look at. And like I said, we're working through what the exact COVID reporting looks like. So I will make a note of that. Okay. Any other questions on the COVID process? Can agencies pull a report on this themselves? So there are quite a few canned reports in the system, and you can absolutely pull reports. We're also working on, like I said, the COVID report. So we've given them examples of reports that we can pull from ORPN, and we're building those COVID reports in Oregon BIDE. So those will be rolled out that agencies could pull. Okay. All right, so I'm going to move to the next topic here. Let me get back to this. Okay, so I want to talk about requesting access to the DAS on behalf of, or the DAS OVO organization. So folks have seen probably in some of the trainings about how you can submit requests inside of the DAS OVO org. But we also know that not all agencies send things to DAS. So this is the process for submitting a request to get set up. So the agency DPOs will submit an email request to the eprocurement@oregon.gov. That's our e-procurement program team inbox with three things. So one would be the one-time request of setting up their agency so that they can make DAS on behalf of requests. And then setup of any users that will need to submit requests for DAS to perform work on their behalf. So I'm guessing most agencies are not going to want every single person on their procurement team to be able to submit those requests to DAS. So which users, maybe it's your DPO and a backup or two, maybe you've got a certain set of folks that you want to be able to send those requests over. So just let us know which folks need to be set up, or which folks would need to be removed. So downstream for maintenance purposes, if you've got somebody who's changed roles or is no longer with your organization, this is also how you'd request removal of that person from DAS on behalf of. From there, our e-procurement program team will process that request to grant or remove the DAS OVO permissions. If folks want to do this now, you can certainly do that. We're set up and ready to take those in. So if you want to start thinking about whether or not your agency needs to be set up in the DAS OVO org and who for your agency would be submitting those requests, you can go ahead and send that email. And I've already sent the slide deck to Kim, so she'll get this out, and these instructions are in there.
Nicole,
Question?
I have a quick question. So this, on behalf of, this is for, we would use this if we needed something done outside of our delegation. So we would need DAS to do that contract on our behalf, but not to do all of our contracting, right? This is just for those requests we need, but we have to leave the tracks for it to be able to do that in the future.
Yeah, so if you want to send DAS a purchase request, or if you wanted to send a request for sole sourced or something like that, those go through DAS OVO. And so that would be setting up your organization within DAS OVO to be able to send those requests over. You could wait and wait until the first time that you need to actually use it. It's a pretty quick turnaround. It's just the users have to be set up by internal administrators. We're the only folks that can get grant permissions between organizations like that in Oregon BIDE.
Okay, thank you. That helps. Thank you.
You bet. Any other questions on this one? Okay.
So, Nicole, we can really, this is for everybody's take home just around there's a little bit of office hours this week and next Tuesday, but then post go live, we do have 3 hours. It's Monday through Friday, 9 to noon and 1 to 4. So very, very active in that first 30 days. but some pre-go live and then some ongoing email support. And that's really all there is to this, and we're almost at time, so I'll scoot it back to you.
So we have that outstanding question from Shannon. So if you guys want to go take a look at that and see if you want to answer it now, Nicole. It was at 2:20.
Sure. Yeah, I will just this slide just to touch on quickly. So for future topics for a future DPO meeting, we'd like to come and talk to folks about the Oregon Vice Canned Report. So that speaks to kind of what Sharon was asking about. We wanted to mention that we have a recruitment open for an Oregon Vice Business Intelligence Analyst that closes on June 28th, in case anyone happens to know a good candidate who'd like to apply. And we are working on planning a forum in July that's focused on phase 2. So with that, questions and feedback. So we'll circle back up to Shannon's question here. One of the things that isn't in the QA guidance is related to adding a total contract value to the contracts that were uploaded to Oregon Vice for us. Do we need to try and add the total contract value on these or leave them at 0?
I would say for reporting and tracking purposes, it would be good to have the NTE in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing that, I mean, when you amend it, you know, maybe you don't need to do that until then, but you know, this will become the reporting and knowing how much is awarded to various vendors. So that would be good.
Great, thank you. Other questions?
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Thank you, the Oregon Vice Project team. Really appreciate the information. It's been very helpful, and we're looking forward to July 1st. We'll see you on the other side for that.
Thank you.
We have another question from Heather. She says, when will the OBO request happen?
Heather, you can send those in now if you would like to. So you could send them in now, or you could wait until you actually are ready to submit a request to DAS on behalf of. But if you know who in your organization would be the users that need to be set up with that access, you can send it in now. And like I said, the instructions are in the slide deck that'll be sent out to folks.
Okay. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay and Kelly. Wanted them to come and give a brief overview of the new equity policy and procedure that DAS has. I don't know if all of you are aware of that, but there is some things we all need to be aware of, and they have a few minutes to talk about that. So Jay and Kelly, take it away.
So thanks, Melissa, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy to be here with my friend Jay Jackson to update you all on the new DAS statewide policy related to equity and co-bid and equity and public contracting. The policy became effective at the very end of last year. I think the actual effective date was maybe December 26th. The policy has a companion procedure document, and it's the procedure document that really walks through the various things that folks are required to do under the policy. So I know that Melissa said brief. I will try to be brief, but there are a number of pieces I did want to touch on. So we'll just pause for a minute while the slide deck comes up, and we'll get started.
Can you not see that?
Not yet, Kim.
Kelly, I think you froze. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you okay. Kim is working to bring the presentation up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't know why it's not showing. Still nothing?
No, we got it now, Kim. You got it.
Thank you very much. I know, Kim, I really appreciate your help. Thanks everybody for your patience. So as I was saying, right at the very end of last year of 2020, new statewide policy, it's 107-009, 0300 was approved. And it has a companion procedure which has the same number, but then with just a PR on the end of it. And so we're going to talk about that for a little bit today. I was going to give a few reminders about COVID and what it was, but with the lead-in that we've had, I'll push from Nicole already on this topic. I'll push through that real quick. So Kim, if we could go to the next slide, that would be great. So obviously, this is a reminder that Certification Office for Business Inclusion and Diversity, or COBID, is the certification office for Oregon state government. Those certified firms that the policy refers to are those firms that have met the certification requirements by Business Oregon in the categories of minority-owned, women-owned, service-disabled, veteran-owned, and emerging small business. And I won't dwell on the COBID vendor directory because Nicole has demonstrated that for us. But the policy does speak to some requirements for folks to go out and check that directory. So we can go ahead and move on then, Kim. So the statewide policy statement in the policy document itself gives a bit of a definition of what business equity, inclusion, and engagement in public procurement refers to. And the main key in this definition is the intentionality, that it is putting requirements on state agencies and state procurement professionals to take some very intentional steps to ensure that we're including disadvantaged, emerging, small, and disabled veteran-owned business in the procurement policy. And so then you see the next bullet is the policy statement itself. And the state government's policy is to provide equal access and opportunity to all Oregon businesses by facilitating equity and fairness in procurement activities. And so that's the policy statement. It spells out a few other requirements, which we'll go to the next screen, please. So the policy requires, as you can see, any person who conducts a procurement activity for state agencies, boards, or commissions must follow the requirements of the policy, and they must follow the requirements of the procedure that lays out specific steps. The policy also requires the state chief procurement officer to provide training and instructional opportunities on the COBID, on the specific policy. And I will mention that procurement services training is actively working on building that training. I anticipate that we'll see that training launch at the very end of the summer, maybe in the first part of September. It'll likely be an online training that you'll access through Workday Learning. I don't anticipate that it's probably going to be more than about a 60 or 90-minute training, but we're still working on finalizing that, and we'll certainly let you all know when it's out there and available. The policy also requires agency managers to ensure that any person under their control has adequate training and is prepared to conduct procurement in accordance with the policy. So again, that's just the crux of both of those last two bullets is there will be training And we are expected to make sure both ourselves and our procurement staff take that training. If we can go on to the next slide. So then we move over to the procedure document, which really lays out in more depth what exactly it is we're being required to do. The first thing that the procedure speaks to is increasing opportunities through business engagement. And the procedure strongly encourages agencies to seek out opportunities for increasing participation by small businesses and certified firms. And it provides a list here of activities, which is not inclusive at all, but a list of activities that agencies can take as they try to reach out to small businesses. And so newsletters, open houses. One thing on here that all of us can do is, I think the third bullet from the bottom speaks about debriefs provided as a best business practice. So at the conclusion of your solicitation processes, if you have vendors that reach out and want more information about maybe why their bid or proposal wasn't successful, the procedure here encourages folks to think about offering those debriefs as a way for vendors to maybe understand better how to respond to solicitations and maybe have a better chance of being successful the next time. So that's in a nutshell what it's speaking about when it talks about business engagement.
Kelly, I raised my hand just so you know. ODOT has a debrief procedure because we do debriefs on our A&E architectural engineering contracts. So if anybody wants a copy of our procedure, you can customize it for your agency and for stuff that's not A&E, but we go into quite a bit of detail of how to conduct a debrief and what you're allowed to talk about, what you're not allowed to talk about. So if anybody wants a copy of that, just let me know.
Thanks, Melissa. I guess I could pause here and see if there are any other questions at this point.
I don't see any questions in the box.
All right, we'll go on to the next slide then. Thank you. So the next piece that the procedure speaks to is not new. It's the method and requirement to provide notice to the governor's policy advisor. This has been a statute for some time. It requires agencies to provide notice to the governor's policy advisor for contracts value over $10,000 or more. And it provides that posting in the state's electronic procurement system, soon to be organized, satisfies that notice requirement for both solicitations and contracts. So no change there, but it's restated again in the new policy and procedure. Next slide, please, Kim. The procedure also calls out a requirement for pre-solicitation consultation. And this is really intended that the folks within your agencies who make requests to your procurement shops to conduct a procurement activity, that they actually discuss with you what opportunities there might be for equity or inclusion in that particular solicitation or procurement activity. And it requires that procurement staff be included early in the planning process for procurements that exceed $10,000. And further, it mentions that procurement staff should be included if the procurements are under $10,000. So this is something, as you're talking to your agency management teams about how your various parts of your agencies interact with procurement, it might be worth mentioning that there is in statewide policy now this requirement that consultation happens. There isn't any direction around sort of what form or format that consultation is, but again, the goal is that there be a conversation related to how can we make sure that whatever procurement activity we're doing is as open and available to certified firms and small businesses as possible. So that's something new. Are there any questions on the pre-solicitation consultation piece?
Yes, there's a couple questions. One is this policy 107-009-0300?
Is that the policy number? Is that what we're being
Yeah,
asked?
that's the question. They're asking if that's the policy number.
Let me look at my notes. It's 107. Yes, that is the policy number.
Okay, the second question is, does this include spots card holders too?
I would say it does include spots card holders to the degree that when you're using your spots card, you are conducting a procurement activity. Most spots cards, that's going to fall in the under $10,000 category. And so that is where you're in the encouraged category in terms of having that opportunity to have those conversations and having that opportunity to include co-bid firms when you're making those selections. But yes, and as much as using the spots as a procurement function, the answer would be yes.
So I need folks to remember that the spots card is simply a payment method. It is not the solicitation. It's not the procurement process. It's just the way we make payment. So when people use the word spots card holders, there should be some type of solicitation record, if it's over $10,000, of what you did to make the purchase. All you're doing with the spots card is making the payment.
Absolutely. Great reminder, Melissa. And I'll put a plug in for DAS's small procurements training where we cover that in detail. So please sign up and let your friends and neighbors know about that class. Next slide, please. So the procedure also requires us when we're developing solicitation documents, and that is used broadly to mean any kind of invitation you're sending out to vendors, to do what we can to ensure that specifications do not inadvertently limit providers, or another way to ensure that we're not being unintentionally restrictive. And they list a number of things there that you're asked to consider. So look at the insurance levels we're requiring. Do they make sense for the type of contract that we have? Utilizing the risk assessment tool. Conducting market research. Considering the scope and size and location for the goods or services. Setting requirements based on the need and so forth. So it's really just asking you to be intentional about looking at what you're asking vendors to provide and making sure that what you're asking fits the need so that you're not unintentionally excluding vendors from that opportunity to participate. So I think we can go to the next slide then. So then this is kind of where we get into the meat and potatoes a little bit more, some specific things that we are required to do in the different procurement functions. The first procurement method the procedure speaks to are small procurements. And the mandate in the procedure is that we review the co-bid vendor directory for providers in the category of work needed before awarding a contract. And so I don't think I could add much to that. We are to be intentional about going and checking that directory and seeing if there are certified firms that can do the work that we need to have done in those small procurement categories. And then it says, to the extent possible, we should record the contracts awarded in the state's current electronic procurement system. And that's no change from what's required today to be noticed in ORPN and what will soon be required to be noticed in Oregon buys. So any questions about the small procurements piece?
Here's another question. Just to be clear, spots card holders who make purchasing decisions and pay for them don't need to look at this site.
I don't believe that's what I intended to say. I hope that's not what I said. If it depends on what role you're playing. If you are purely using your spots card to pay an invoice for a purchase that's been procurement that's been done and a purchase that's been approved elsewhere, then no, you wouldn't need to go out and do this process. But if you're in the role of the purchaser in terms of you're making the decision of what to buy and whom to buy it from, then yes, that is a small procurement. If it's between $1 and $10,000, and you do need to go out and check the COVID vendor directory before you finalize that, making that purchase decision.
All right, they said, got it. Thank you for clarifying. Our cardholders may make buy decisions and pay for them. So I think you cleared it up.
All right, thanks. So I think that's all I have for small procurements. We can go on to the next slide then, please, Kim. So for intermediates, this is really kind of where the meat, where the biggest impact to our work is. This is not different from the language in the governor's executive order of 3 years ago, but it's now restated in a statewide policy. And for intermediate procurements, agencies must directly solicit quotes or invite bids or proposals from at least one non-COVID certified firm and include a minimum of at least one COVID certified firm from each certification category whenever possible. So that they're saying there is.
Does that mean that we have to go out and so let's say we post it on Organize, we have to reach out to one, if there are COVID firms within each of the categories, we have to solicit to each one of them. So we could have up to 5 additional notices that we have to give, because if there's a COVID certified firm from each of the categories, then we're sending it out to all 5.
That's correct.
Okay.
Correct. Unless you're sending out something, to the general vending community, but and intermediates where you maybe are being very intentional about selecting, sending to specific vendors for quotes, you need to check, and if they exist, include at least one firm from each of those categories. And then the procedure goes on to say, you may not use one firm that happens to be certified in all the categories to meet the requirement. That if they exist, there needs to be 5 separate firms that you're reaching out to. So I want to pause on that and see if there are questions.
I don't see any.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. We'll go on to the next slide then. So this gets back to pretty similar to what we do today. So for procurements for supplies and services over $150,000, what we typically call formal procurements, you're going to be notifying all providers through the state's electronic procurement system. So you are not required to directly invite COVID firms, because they should be, as long as you've selected your commodity codes appropriately for what you're soliciting for, the certified firms in those commodity categories should receive notice and have access to the opportunity. But you are encouraged to also directly invite COVID firms and non-COVID firms to ensure business equity and inclusion. So the takeaway here is it's not mandated that you take an extra step to specifically select COVID firms for an invitation or push communication, but it's encouraged. But in any event, they should get those notifications, because you're going to be using Organize anyway to post your solicitation. Any questions on that one?
Nope.
All right, we'll move on next. And here's kind of the slide I call everything else. And I'm going to walk through this quickly, and we'll certainly get the slide deck out to you all. So for sole source procurements for supplies and services, They asked, the policy actually requires that when you're doing market research to justify your sole source, that you have also gone out and looked at the co-bid vendor directory and considered the co-bid firms that are available. For special procurements for supplies and services, same thing. Agencies are required to review the co-bid vendor directory and just to see what suppliers might be out there. It's not mandating you do anything other than go out and do that review and see what's out there. For emergency procurements for supplies and services, including A&E and public improvement, you are encouraged to invite competition when practical, which is always the case in emergency procurements. And if competition is practical, meaning you have time to do some type of competition, given the emergency you're facing, then you're urged to follow the processes and conditions of the procedure. So you would go back and say, what kind of procurement am I doing to meet the emergency, sole source, intermediate, formal, and you would be encouraged to follow the steps that were laid out here for each of those processes, if you're able to do competition within your emergency. So that's an ask, not a mandate. And then finally, direct selection and informal selection procurements for A&E and competitive quote procurements for public improvement. This is a little tricky because there are a lot of other legal requirements around both of these types of procurements. So in addition to anything else you're required to do, because I didn't want to list them all, you must also comply with the processes laid out in the procedure. And when it refers to Section 2 and Section 7B, that's again saying for each procurement method and level, following those steps. And then any questions on any of these? I think these are more straightforward.
So Kelly, my recommendation is on the special procurement document. Maybe you have a checkbox to remind people to do this when they do a special procurement.
You know, Melissa, I was thinking about that as I was reading that, is make that one of the checks that we asked. Did you check that? So that's a good piece. Thank you. All right, next slide. And the next slide is usually the very favorite one of my presentations. It's the blank screen, which means that's all I had for you today. I know that Kim has sent out the policy statement and the procedure document. We'll get the slide deck out to you. I don't know if there's any other questions. You can ask them now, or you can send them to Jay or I as you come across them, and we'll be happy to answer them. And so with that, Melissa, I guess it's back to you.
All right, well, just a recommendation to everybody. One of the things that ODOT's doing is, as we're looking at how our processes are going to change for order and buys, we're going to also include these changes in there so that we can just incorporate the new ways of doing business for this as well. So just so you know. The next people we have on the agenda is Jay. I'm not sure, is Debbie here, Kelly?
No,
She might be late, but I can speak to her her piece if need be.
Okay. So Jay, I'm going to turn it over to you. Just so you know, we knew that these sections may go over a little bit. That's why we left a little bit of flush time at the end. So we're doing okay on time. I just want to let you know, Jay and Debbie or Kelly, whoever's going to do Debbie and Kelly's section. We're doing okay on time. I would just like to wrap up at 3:20 if possible.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. Kelly, are you prepared to channel Debbie on House Bill 2374?
I would never attempt to channel Debbie, but I am prepared to speak on that topic.
Okay.
Do you want me to go first, Jay?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so sure. So, as most of you probably know, if you've been able to dial into Jay's well-attended and wildly popular legislative update calls, House Bill 2374, excuse me, did pass. It's been signed by the governor. The bill had an emergency clause, so it has been effective now for a few days already. Just to briefly talk about the bill, then I'll talk about the actions that Procurement Service is taking. It requires DAS to develop training materials and procedures for state contracting agencies as it relates to applying contract preferences. It requires state agencies to report to DAS by August 15th of 2022 regarding procurement solicited between June 3rd, so 3 weeks ago, 2021 and July 31st, 2022. It requires that those reports include which contract preferences were applied and why discretionary preferences were or were not applied. It requires DAS then to report to the legislature by September 30th of 2022 a summary of the contract preferences applied by the agencies and all of the reasons why the discretionary preferences were not used. And DAS is to include in our report any recommendations for ensuring state contracting agencies apply preferences as intended by the legislature. So there is a lot packed into that bill. Jay, did you want to add anything to that before I move into the actions that we're going to take?
Yeah, I'd just like to emphasize that the way the bill, now law, was written, it speaks to all preferences, and then the explanation of why certain preferences were or were not applied applies only to discretionary preferences. And the law does not set any threshold dollar amounts. What it does is it speaks in terms of procurements that an agency solicits. So in all likelihood, we're talking about procurements over $150,000. But if agencies choose to solicit below that, even for a small procurement, then you would include any preferences that were applied.
Thank you, Jay. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Just in the way of a little bit of background, Representative Nathanson is very interested in establishing preferences and contracting that will benefit Oregon. Part of the work that Debbie did in working with Rep. Nathanson was to be able to move off the idea of establishing new preferences this session, but with the understanding which this bill provides that a couple of steps happen. One of those is to understand what preferences exist today, and the reasons why agencies do or do not use them. And secondly would be to analyze that information and recommend statutory changes that would, or potentially new preferences that would further the ability to apply preferences. So this is giving us time to do the study, to gather the information that I mentioned, and to make those recommendations back to the legislature for their use in deciding if they want to move optional preferences to mandatory or establish new ones. So that's a little bit of how we got here. So how are we going to implement this thing? Right now, the first step is we are working on developing a training course on how to apply preferences. It'll cover what the preferences are. It'll spend time providing recommendations, and we'll hopefully be able to use some scenarios to train folks on how to apply the various preferences. The course is still under development. I suspect it'll probably be less than an hour, probably more like 45 minutes. And right now we're thinking it's going to be an online course. That either one of those two things, the length or the method, could change depending on what the content looks like. But then again, we're hoping to have that course launched in late summer or very early fall so we can meet that requirement. In conjunction with that training, guidelines will be developed in the application of preferences. And I think that our thinking right now, and Jay, you can correct me if I have any of this wrong, but I believe our thinking right now is to help develop some checklists and some other decision-making tools that would go along with the training that would help folks apply preferences. Did I get that right, Jay?
Yes, I think so. We're gonna try and make this as simple and painless as possible for agencies to comply, because we realize this is going to add to your workload.
So on the simple and painless category, then this on to how do we gather the information that we need to gather and able to report back to the legislature. A web form is being developed for agencies to report those procurements where a preference was applied. Oregon Buys doesn't capture that information. So the web form, we're hoping to have available right around the 1st of September. A lot of things available in September. So until that time, I would recommend that agencies keep a note of which procurements you will need to enter into that web form once it becomes available. And then on a quarterly basis, we will provide reports to agencies to assist you in tracking your spend and to encourage data entry along the way. So we're still developing these various implementation pieces, and we'll be back to report on it in more detail. And I guess the only last thing I would add before I turn it back over to Jay would be, it's not clear to me, and Jay, you may have touched on this, exactly which procurements are included. Is it those that are over 10,000 or is it over 150,000? I'm not sure we know that, do we, Jay?
Well, it's the language that the law uses is procurements that agencies solicit. And so if you did a solicitation, then you would come under the requirement for this reporting. So even if it's a low dollar small procurement, but you chose to do a solicitation, you would include that in your report.
Okay, good enough.
Hopefully that helps to clear that up.
Well, we have a question. So we have a couple questions. So we'll go with Sharon's question first. Will you send out a list of the things we need to make note of so we will have that to enter later?
The answer is yes. Once we sort of have the format of the web form sorted out, we'll send that out so you can use that for capturing the information until the form is up and available.
And I have a couple questions. One is, does this apply to state funded projects only?
I'm gonna turn that over to Jay Jackson.
Because for federal funds, we can't apply a preference, period, never. We can never apply a preference. So, except by America in some cases. So are we still gonna have to report that if it's federally funded? Even $1, we can't apply the preference if it's federal funded.
I'll have to look into that. That's probably something we'll need to clarify by rule or policy, because I don't think that is specifically addressed in the bill. So that's a good question, Melissa. I would tend to think that they intended it for state funds, And I think we could probably limit it to that by way of a clarification.
Yeah, because, so I know Shannon asked the same question because she has federal money. And I don't know, maybe DHS probably has federal money too, but when I talked to Debbie about this, you know, she was like, well, we would only require you to put something in the web form if you applied a preference. But it sounds like the bill wants more than that. So I think we really have to clarify this because I don't want to have my folks do a bunch of unnecessary. We have to implement, you know, this new policy and procedure stuff that's been in effect for a while. And it's just, you know, all the things are just adding more process, more time, and more production hours to our people who already have a lot of things to check to make sure they're complying with law. So if it's not going to apply, I would want to know that because I don't want to do unnecessary work. I don't want to put stuff into something that really doesn't matter. Because to be honest with you, there's very few times we're ever going to be putting anything in there. And I don't want to have to just tell people to go in and put it in there saying you didn't apply a preference. And the
So
second
I
thing,
think
Right.
I think how a number of agencies are in that same bucket, including DAS in some cases. But I think we'll have to get clarification on that piece, Jay, and come back.
okay. And then the second piece is I did ask Debbie, and I thought it got brought up to Jenny about could we have a field in Oregon Buys? And I'm answering this, and I'm going to ask it, and then I'm going to answer what I think I heard, just so people aren't wondering about it. Like, why do we have to go to this other document? So I asked if we could put it into Oregon Buys. I think they're looking at that. And the answer to that question more wholly is anytime we take up real estate in Oregon Buys, remember this bill sunsets. So putting something into Oregon Buys as a kind of permanent configuration takes up real estate for something we may just be doing on a short period of time. So I think that's something we need to still look at. You know, is it feasible to put it in Oregon Buys so we don't have to go back out of the system to do it? But I also understand the flip side. Why would we put it into Oregon Buys if it's really a bill that's going to have a sunset on it? So just so everybody knows, that's kind of my discussions. And just in case everybody was thinking that and didn't ask that, I'm asking and letting you know that's kind of what I'm thinking, but I don't know how far. I think Jenny mentioned something about maybe being able to do it in Oregon Buys, but I don't know if that's something we're going to end up with.
No, I didn't.
Oh, good. Then you
But
did.
it's not reportable. No, thank you. Yeah. Which contract preferences set forth in statute or administrative rule. And I said that's not reportable. And why the agency applied, that's subjective. It's not reportable.
Okay, that's good to know.
I mean, the number of procurements we solicited for, yes, that's reportable. And the general nature, I mean, you'll have a discipline and a title, but the other things were not reportable. And any custom column would be free form because there's from preferences. I mean, the list is almost endless, it seems.
It's a significant list.
Yeah. So no, I would, and unless Debbie had a different opinion, but that was my response back to you and Euphemia.
Yeah, I couldn't remember. That's why I was saying I thought you were looking at it, but I wasn't sure where we landed. So anyway, so it sounds like we're not going to be able to do it in Oregon Buys, so it will be something we have to go outside of Oregon Buys and enter probably on your website for a period of time.
Yeah, that's our thinking right now is a fillable web form that you would go to our website information. We will be pushing out more communication on each of these aspects as we get them developed. And I know Jay will follow around and get that question answered about federal funds versus state funded. That's probably all I can really share on this topic today. But please send Jay all of your questions, and he'll make sure they get answered.
All right. Thank you, Jay. So Jay, you have about 5 minutes. So if you want to take us through a quick overview of the bills that have passed, that would be great.
Okay.
I know there's quite a few.
Yeah, hopefully, everyone or those at least that are interested have been receiving the legislative report that I send out on a weekly basis. Uh, and I indicate in there, as soon as I have the information, uh, any bills that have become law, and it also includes if they're on their way to the governor for signature. And then once they're signed, as soon as I have a Oregon laws citation, I add that to the list. Uh, I will continue to update that. So there'll be a post legislative session report that will include all the information. And then the other thing that I plan to do is a implementation report, which will take the bills that became law and try to identify the any deadlines or key effective dates, and also identify as best I can who may have responsibility for the bulk of implementing those new laws. So knowing that that stuff will be forthcoming here shortly, since they have to wrap up by Monday the 28th, I think I can probably hold off on going into much detail at this time, Melissa.
Okay, so I think we'll talk a little bit at the end about our summer schedule, but I think we may want to consider that when you come back in July on what,
Sure.
if we could go into some of those more detail, and maybe if you have implementation plans for any of them and what you're planning to do, if it's anything that DAS is responsible for, that would be great for us to know, I think. Okay.
Sure, and that implementation plan, frankly, one of the reasons I do that is as a transition into the rulemaking process.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Does anybody have any questions about any bills that have passed that you might be interested in knowing about from the list that Jay sends out?
Also, I'd like to remind everyone, if you have not received the report and you would like to, just shoot me an email and I'll be happy to send it out to you.
Okay. So the next is a short video about ODOT, and it also represents the important work of our procurement office. So, you know, we've had all these wildfires last year, and it was pretty destructive. And ODOT was asked to lead the recovery efforts along with FEMA. And so we've been taking lead on that. And our procurement office has been center stage for getting all those contracts in place. And these are very large contracts under the emergency declaration of the governor, exercising some authority that I've never seen her exercise before, at least recently. And so I wanted to just show you the results of some of that work. It's a very short video, and I'd like to know if other people have things that they'd like to celebrate from their agencies that will represent the good work that your procurement office does as well. Because it's really good to show the end results of our work, or at least the results of our work as it's going on. So Mary's gonna run this for us, and it's a pretty quick video.
I got up in the morning and I remember looking outside and saying, what a gorgeous day. That's why I love to live in Oregon. And I had to leave to go pick up an order from Fred Meyer. On the way back, I get a phone call from a coworker that they're evacuating parts of Talent, and they mentioned where you live. So I came to the house, got my medicine. The policeman was out there. You need to leave now. And as I backed out of the driveway, I looked towards Ashland, and I could see this ball of smoke and orange coming this way. It was just on the other side of the property. So I was one of the last of the people out of here. this wonderful woman says, I went to a Facebook page about the fire, and your house on 2 different sites, it said it was spared. And I was so very lucky and so grateful to so many people. When I moved back to my house, this is 5 weeks after the fire, it was overwhelming. You look out and you see nothing. How did this little house make it? When I would go out to walk, seeing the cars there and remembering who lived on the property. My neighbors lost every single thing, and I couldn't sleep. I was so upset that why was I spared? You know, the survivor's guilt. When we saw ODOT here, then things started to fall into place. Well, I decided to write a letter to the editor. I've never done this before because I was so pleased with the quality of work that ODOT was doing here, but also the quality of the subcontractors. I actually have a ringside seat, you know. All of them were professional. They weren't sloppy. They made sure everything was tidy before they left for the night. It was just refreshing, and they were so considerate of us. The rapidity of the response was very heartwarming to us. I'd write that same letter I wrote to the editor 10 times over because they've done a wonderful job. Just to be able to see our neighbors come back will be so very exciting.
So, Shannon's talking about the firefighters and all the work they did too. It's not lost on me how much impact it had on so many people. Were there to help, address the fires, take care of the cleanup, and it's still going on. So my plug is, it's fire season right now, and it's really important that everybody let their friends and families know. Please be very, very careful about fires in your backyards or burning stuff, because a lot of the fires start from humans, and the devastation can be pretty hefty. And I really, really, really want to just remind people that it's really critical that we be super careful. This is a dry season. We've had a light rain season this year. So we're going to be in for another ride, I think, if we don't, each of us, take responsibility for making sure that we're being very careful with fires. Shannon, do you want to say anything from your perspective?
Yeah, so I just made my comment that, last year I was on several fires, but Holiday Farm fire for 21 days. And that was really the first time I had the opportunity to see the partnership between ODOT and ODF, because things were happening at the same time rather than, okay, we've got the fire turned back over. Now the district's going to work with ODOT. So, to this day, I'm still learning the amazing things that each agency does. And so I really appreciated that video. But I'll add too, definitely, you'll hear it a million times. Just make sure that, you're watching out for what you're doing. And some of it is self-policing for your friends and family. With the 4th of July coming, we've already had, in fact, we have one team out right now, excuse me, in Klamath area. And we don't want to have to go there multiple times this year because I miss you guys. So keep me home, keep me engaged by making sure on the 4th and every other day that you guys think twice before you might set something on fire. That's it, I think.
So there's a lot of politics, and there's a lot of people that have issues or concerns about logging and all the stuff because we're, pulling down trees for safety reasons. We have to. But at the same time, ODOT's doing really great work, and there's a lot of people working really hard in our agency to take care of this. So thank you so much, everyone, for letting me share that with you. And if you guys have important videos or important stories you want to tell about the great work that we do in our procurement profession, we want to share it here. So please let me know. All right, the last thing I wanted to do is really talk about the summer. We have normally not had some meetings in July and August, but because Organize is implementing on July 1st, and we do have laws, and the legislative session will be hopefully over, even if they have an interim session, but at least it'll be over for this part. We'll have more clarity on the new laws that have come out. So I was going to propose that we have a July meeting, and then we maybe consider not an August meeting, or we do an August meeting and not have a July meeting. But I personally am thinking, and Jan, you can jump in on this. Sorry. That the July meeting would be better because we'll have some more experience with Organize after it's implemented. So just wanted people's thoughts in the comments about if you would be good and if you would be supportive of a July meeting. Do you want to say anything, Jan, too?
Yeah, I would just add on to that, when we get into August, we're pretty close to the Labor Day weekend, and there's a lot going on with families and kids going back to school and a lot of adjustments. And I also agree with what Melissa said about Oregon buys. There is, they're rolling it out right now. And so I would vote for a July meeting over an August meeting.
Okay, so I'm seeing people say July, and I'm going to assume if nobody comments, then they're fine with July. So we're going to go ahead and schedule the July meeting, and then we can revisit then if we think we need an August meeting. But I know that everybody's going to be going back to school. Things may be different, because COVID may be, the COVID restrictions may be, so it might be kind of a crazy time. So we'll reconsider the August if we really need it. But at this point, I think we'll just stick with the July meeting, and we'll have a full enriched agenda for that, which will probably be organized, and legislative updates, which will probably take up the majority of that meeting. And I appreciate everybody's participation today and feedback. So if we could go around just real quick, we have a couple minutes. Does anybody want to share any agency happenings or things they'd like the group to know? Okay, well, I'll adjourn the meeting for today. Thank you so much for everybody participating. And I will get out the DPO procedure to everybody as promised. And I appreciate everybody's participation. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This is a great meeting.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.